Thank you, Jill, and thank you everybody for attending today. I hope you're all doing well. And we're going to talk today about creating a disaster recovery action plan. So really, I consider this the process of planning for a disaster, which is kind of ongoing. And Jill and I were actually chatting before we started. I feel like now is really, there's never a better time to make sure you have a plan for disaster, but I would actually say, considering things that are happening geopolitically now, given what's happening in Eastern Europe and Russia, there is a threat that things on a cybersecurity level could impact regular people as a result of this stuff. I mean, Russia and others in that part of the world are known to cause trouble with this stuff. So I think it's really important just for us to be ready for what could happen. Anyway, let's get started. Why is now a great time to revisit disaster recovery planning besides what I just mentioned? So, first off, more organizations are using the cloud more than before. So, in the past, we were highly leveraged on local systems, and we were focused on, well, what happens if these servers fail, or if this power system fails, or this internet connection fails, or we have a flood or a fire, and you could sort of create a laundry list of plausible scenarios. But now people's assets, their digital assets, data, applications, etc., are located in a variety of places. They're located still on servers maybe that they hold in their office, or a network attached storage device, but they're also in Office 365 or Google, or they have a Amazon or Azure server, or they're using a software as a service provider like a web-based, like a Salesforce or something like that. And so the reality is that your systems and the things that could impact your operation are now located in a variety of decentralized places. And disaster recovery is going to be more complex as a result. The parameters for what constitutes disaster have expanded. So I mean, think right now, since we are leveraging the cloud, sort of to pivot off of that, if your office is highly dependent on using things like email or Microsoft Teams in order to get your work done and communicate and operate with one another, maybe your office is highly decentralized, all of a sudden a Teams outage could be considered a disaster, whereas before a Teams outage might be considered a minor inconvenience. We should really be looking at now in 2022, now that we're maybe hopefully getting through the worst parts of COVID, that maybe work is, I think work has permanently changed to sort of this hybrid stuff. You are going to have more remote workers than before. But what are the events that could create operational challenges for us, and how have they differed than from the past? From a technology perspective, the stakes are just higher and the threats are greater, and we need our technology more. So, 20 years ago, not everybody necessarily needed a computer to get their day-to-day work done. And now it's sort of hard to imagine any of us getting our work done without an internet connection, without access to a computer and our data. We just leverage this stuff way more than we did before. Not only that, there's just more threats. The more we do and the more we take advantage of it, the more criminals and bad guys want to take advantage of those assets. There's more ransomware threats. There are more things like payment fraud, identity theft, information being sold on the dark web, etc. And so there's just more out there. And so it's sort of a double-edged sword. I am a believer in technology, and that we should utilize technology more and more to get more productivity and a better, both business life and personal life out of it. However, that goes along with the caveat that we now have to take a little bit more energy and effort into protecting those assets. I mentioned before, we're just more decentralized now. People and systems and data are sitting in more places for more people. So today's agenda is going to go over a number of things. First, we're going to look at the technology most businesses must plan around. So here are the things that an average business that I might work with needs to think about planning for. We're going to talk about stakeholders and assets to protect. So when we're talking about disaster, it's very tempting to just focus on how it affects our operation, but the reality is that we have other people to keep in mind that have to be a part of our plan. We want to redefine what a disaster is. I sort of alluded to that moments ago. Building a disaster response team. So, disaster planning can't be done solo. If you're having a major incident, you're going to need people from a variety of disciplines, and you're going to just need a lot of energy. You know, it's more than a one-person job. Creating and documenting your plan, adapting and reevaluating your plan. Very important that we don't just put something in place and forget about it for the next 6 years. We have to look at this constantly and adapt as we change. And then, of course, Q&A. It's really important. Of course, you know, I'm talking about the stuff that I think is important right now, but maybe you have questions that I'm not going to address, so we want to get into that. So the technology you need to plan around. You can see these two people planning around their technology right now. They're so happy about it. So there's things like core applications. So you could probably come up with a list for your organization of, you know, I'm guessing maybe it's 4 or 5 applications that are central to your day-to-day operations. So here at DP Solutions, we use a tool called ConnectWise, which helps us manage tickets and agreements, and we can put our time in and stuff like that. You might have things like QuickBooks or Salesforce or some kind of enterprise resource planning tool, or maybe a custom application that's very specific to your business. Maybe it's a design thing or some sort of project management tool. You know, it's going to be different for everybody, but we obviously need to plan around those, because when we're down, we need to be able to keep working. And our outages, our disasters may have a little bit longer impact. So we have to assume that those core things will need to be provided in a different way during a disaster. Communication. So you know, it's not just our phone system anymore that we need to be concerned with, which may not even exist at our main office, but also things like text messages. So knowing how to reach our staff via text message. Phone systems, email. Maybe you have other kind of communications, chats. Maybe you use Slack. You know, there was I think it was yesterday actually, where Slack had a major outage, and a lot of businesses are using Slack just to have group cohesion and team discussion. ISP connectivity. So you know, now that we're utilizing the cloud and we are decentralized, we're leveraging our ISPs more than ever before. And it's not just connectivity, really. I probably should have written bandwidth. You know, if you have a 100 meg internet connection going outward and you're using this all day to send up your plans or proposals, maybe it's you've got CAD drawings or graphics that you're trying to upload to a third party. If your ISP is now central to that. If 695 is shut down and nobody can get from point A to point B, all of a sudden all work comes to a halt. We need to make sure ISPs at all of our locations where people are working are accessible. Network infrastructure. So this is sort of old school stuff. What about the highways in our offices? So the cables in the walls, the wireless access points, the switches, the routers, the firewalls that we have locally. We still need to plan around that stuff, but also maybe some of the network infrastructure at people's homes. So you know, if you have half your staff who's working full-time remotely, all of a sudden their router or their wireless access point may be critical to your success during a disaster. Security products. So things like your endpoint detection software, your tools like patch management or authentication tools, like maybe you're using something like Duo for multi-factor authentication. We need to plan around failures to those security tools as well. Security tools are great and we need them, but we also need to maintain them and plan as if they could potentially be a target as well. And then, of course, document management and storage. So we're all probably working on Word docs and PDFs and Excel spreadsheets and all that stuff. One of the things that's really important is to figure out where those things live. Shadow IT and data sprawl is a reality of 2022 and the sort of decentralized workplace. And it's okay if data exists in multiple places. It's just that we have to document and plan around it. Every place that data lives is a place we need to secure, it's a place we need to back up, and it's a place that we need to make sure we monitor. Stakeholders. Before we finalize anything on a DR plan, we have to identify who's impacted by it. So we can't have it be too self-serving, focusing on whoever's writing it cares about it. It has to be more about who is impacted in the broader community by a disaster in our organization. So that starts with your staff. So obviously, if something happened in your office or your business and there was some kind of disaster, let's say for the sake of argument, that your ERP was attacked by a foreign entity and it was knocked out and ransomware knocked it out, you're not going to have it for 2 weeks. What message are you going to give your staff about how they're going to work from day to day? How are they going to have access to their data? What are they going to communicate to their customers about how they work? Are you just going to have to lay them off or something like that? I mean, there has to be a plan to communicate to the staff as it happens what's going to occur without these systems in place. Your customer and people whose information you hold. So if you, a good example of this might be a medical practice. You know, HIPAA demands that if you have a major breach and data is extracted, patient health information is extracted, you have a legal and moral and ethical obligation to share with those individuals that their information was breached. You owe that information obviously to the government as well as insurance companies, et cetera, that you have been the victim of a breach and that they are aware of it and that you're there to support them because you have that obligation, sometimes legally. I mentioned the government before. Under certain circumstances, especially now that you're going to start seeing things like critical infrastructure, defense contractors, financial services, businesses, people who hold personally identifiable data, you're just going to see more laws and regulations regarding securing networks. And in the middle of a disaster, while you're recovering, you're still going to have an obligation to either prove to the government that you were doing the right things and that you're a victim and not, you didn't have your head in the sand when it comes to this stuff. But also that you're handling it in the proper way, that you prepared for this stuff in the first place, that you aren't being totally negligent and that you don't deserve to be fined or held legally liable for a security incident that maybe could have been avoided in the first place. Your cyber insurance provider. So, it's kind of astonishing to me. People plan around disaster recovery and planning, but they don't have the third parties in place to provide them the services that they're just not going to have internally. You know, if you have a major incident, I keep talking about security, but it could be anything really. But security are going to be some of the most common incidents we're focusing on. You're going to need a forensics firm potentially to be able to go back and look in and figure out exactly how the attack happened and how it could be avoided in the future. You might need somebody from a law firm to negotiate with a criminal about how to pay Bitcoin to pay off a ransomware if the worst should happen. You are probably going to need a lawyer who can, if you are legally liable for something, who can actually defend you and provide you with the support your business needs. A lot of that's going to come from your cyber insurance provider, so they need to be a part of your DR planning. Your IT services provider obviously has to be a part of it. So, not all disasters are entirely held by somebody like DP Solutions. DP Solutions can't do a whole lot if all the sprinklers go off in the building and there's a fire. I mean, certainly we can help on the IT perspective and recover that stuff, but we're a part of your team in doing that recovery. You have to own the recovery process, and we're there to support you. But the IT services provider or your IT staff or whoever has to be a part of your disaster plan. I think that goes without saying. Defining a disaster. So a disaster is going to vary for each organization. And so the way to define a disaster is to combine an event with something that has a significant impact on one of the stakeholders. Some of the things I mentioned here may not actually be impactful for you. They may not be considered disasters. There may be things here that I didn't list at all that I wouldn't even think of as impactful to a business that could be immensely impactful to you. I brought up the Slack example before. If Slack went down for DP, I think people have used Slack in the past, but we're not really using it right now. If Slack went down for us, it wouldn't be a big deal. If Teams went down for us, it might be a much bigger deal for our operation. Or if ConnectWise went down, it'd be a much bigger deal for our operation. So this is very personal. So the first thing is physical or environmental disasters. So fire, flood, tornado, and the impact is going to probably change with a decentralized staff. And what I could have also wrote is a migration to the cloud. I remember we dealt with an incident, I'm not going to say who, but several years ago where there's a major fire and a lot of on-site resources, a server closet goes up in smoke, literally. And now you're figuring out how to take assets that were located on-site in a local server closet and restoring it to a private cloud or a private data center or something like that This was the way a lot of disaster recovery planning happened. But now those assets that are in your office may be much more limited. It may just be some local files. It may be that your VPN is centralized out of your main office or something like that. I mean, it's just the impact is probably going to be different than it was before. And the thing you may be planning around now when it comes to things like physical disasters are more of operational questions. You know, my staff was coming in here every day to do their work, and now they're not. How do we operate in such a way that they can work remotely because these people don't have the high-speed internet connections that we would have in the office or whatever. Cybersecurity incidents. So obviously, I think this would apply to everyone. I can't imagine that a cybersecurity incident wouldn't be disastrous for almost any business, but you could consider any number of incidents here. Ransomware, where a system gets completely locked up. Account compromise, which is, it could very well be a disaster. You know, imagine if the CEO of your company has their email account taken over, and now all of a sudden a criminal is using that leverage to steal information or try to convince other people, you know, commit other phishing attacks on behalf of, you know, pretending to be the CEO or something like that. That could be a disaster in a business, and maybe there's not a flood or a fire everywhere, or your systems aren't down, but now someone is leveraging your information against you, and you're losing a lot of stuff. Data breaches would certainly be a disaster. Different incidents are going to have different responses. So, if, for example, you know, I mentioned the CEO. If the CEO has their account taken over and they have access to a lot of rights or a lot of things and have power with their access, that's going to be a very significant incident. However, if maybe the person who just started their job on Tuesday had their account breached and all they have access to is the training materials that you provided them, the company handbook or something like that, obviously we're not going to handle that incident in the same fashion. So it's really important that when we define cybersecurity incidents, that there's certainly a point where a incident goes from something that needs to be fixed and is important to now it's an all hands on deck situation and we have to involve all of these, you know, 50 parties in resolving it. Power network ISP failure. So, you know, even when power is restored, you could have a serious impact to your system. So imagine, if you will, you know, a lightning bolt hits the power lines or something, and there's some surge, and all of a sudden your network equipment is fried. You know, maybe for some people the power might just go off and on, and then you're back up and running, and it's a minor inconvenience. But for others, your whole infrastructure may be dead. I mean, who knows? You need to plan around that kind of thing. Cloud provider or local server failure. So obviously, things still just fail for random reasons. Sometimes it's stuff's old. Sometimes there's a defective part. Sometimes a cloud provider isn't doing the things they're supposed to do. You know, when you sign an agreement with somebody, whether it's Microsoft or Salesforce or Google or whoever, to do business with you, and you're leveraging their services remotely, they're probably guaranteeing a lot of stuff. They're probably telling you that we have a certain amount of uptime, and these are the processes we go through to audit ourselves for security, and this is what we do to resolve this issue and that issue, and it makes you feel really good about working with them. But then when the rubber hits the road, something bad happens, and it may or may not be their fault, or they could have been completely full of it when they made those promises to you. Regardless, we can't assume that the assurances they made to us will come to pass, and so we have to plan as if they completely go away and have an alternative in mind. A disaster response team. So nobody can deal with this alone. You need support to respond effectively. So the first person I put here is an internal champion. And I wanted to make this a little bit broad because in many operations, this could be the head of the company. This could be a CIO type. It could be an operations manager, an HR person. Kind of depends on the organization, what you're dealing with. But the important thing is the champion has to have some authority, you know, somebody who could keep processes moving, knows how to reach different people. Maybe they're not an expert in everything, you know. The person who's leading your disaster response team may not understand every way your firewall works or how your backups work, but they know how to reach the IT people and get them moving so that things move forward. I hope that makes sense. It's somebody who leads the charge. IT staff or services provider. Obviously, these are the people who know your infrastructure and are going to be the ones who are turning the wrenches, coming up with the technical solutions to these problems, so on and so forth. I mentioned this before, the cyber insurance provider. So they're going to provide a lot of services that you're generally not going to have remotely, especially if you're a smaller business. Forensics, legal support, negotiation with criminals, etc. These are what cyber insurance providers are essentially for. They're not for stopping incidents necessarily. I mean, they're going to have standards that are going to hopefully reduce the chances that you have an incident, but they're there to respond and provide you support in the need of an issue. And I would look at the same way I look at homeowners insurance or business insurance and stuff like that. It's not that you want to use these things. It's not like you want to call your cyber insurance provider and say, hey, I've got a breach and I need your help. It's an in case of emergency, break open glass kind of thing. There's the authorities. So in the event of a serious incident, you may need to get the FBI involved. Whoops. I don't know why this happens sometimes where it stops my presentation. You may need to get the authorities involved. We had an incident, I remember, with a client, and this was a phishing incident, and somebody sent out a lot of social security numbers unknowingly. There wasn't an actual technical security breach. It wasn't like a bunch of hackers like broke in and stole all this information and then sent it on the dark web. The individual volunteered this information because they were tricked by someone else. And so we had to, the FBI had to get involved, because there was a amount of data that was significant and an amount of money that was significant enough. So that may have to happen. Not all the time, but sometimes. And then backup support. So other people need to be ready to respond if people on the team are not available. So I mentioned all of these people. I mean, obviously the authorities don't have a backup. It's just other people within state and local government. But even though you have an internal champion, someone who's leading the charge, somebody else on the management team should kind of have an idea of what's going on in the event of an incident, because we're all fallible. We all have things going on. We go on vacations. Sometimes we get sick. Sometimes we can't come in. Sometimes something's going on, or sometimes we up and quit one day. We get a new job, and so we have to have contingency plans in place for the people on our disaster team. Creating and documenting your plan. So first, don't overthink, use templates. So let's say you're creating a disaster recovery plan from scratch, or you decide you're not happy with your plan, you want to do a new one. There are so many templates out there to create rules and create guidance for your team. I recommend the SANS Institute. You can just Google it, very easy. And they have disaster response templates as well as other things. Maybe you want to create an acceptable use policy, or maybe you want to create a sensitive data policy, whatever. You can find that stuff. And you don't want to be too brainless about it. You don't want to just say, oh, I found it and I put my name on it, we're good to go. It's nothing like that. But you want to make sure it actually speaks to what your concerns are. And you might want to have, if you take a template like this and you fill in your stuff and you put together what you think is a good disaster response plan, probably a good idea to have somebody else take a look at it and give their insight, because it's really easy to overlook stuff. Document your technology. So you want to document the technology supporting your systems, such as backup, offsite recovery solutions, security tools, etc. So within the plan itself, we should be talking very specifically about what tools we're using. If our servers fail, we're going to use this Datto backup, and it's going to recover us locally to this on-site, but also remotely to this third-party data center. We should be very specific, and that way, if someone's coming in and they've never seen this plan before, or they're a new staff member, or someone moves on, they're able to jump in and read and follow the instructions of the plan. But that requires some specifics. It shouldn't say, we have a backup that goes off-site. It should say, we use this backup to go off-site, and this is what it does. And then as the plan changes, as technology changes, you can update those specifics. You don't need to get down to the specific IP address or login or something. It needs to be like a guide for navigating a disaster. Communication information. So obviously all team members, any stakeholders, any authorities you need to reach, cyber insurance providers, whatever, all of those communication things should be there. You should specify who's on the team, who's leading this plan, so on and so forth. And don't be afraid to include people's information multiple times. It's better to reference individuals more than once than not at all. The review process. So along with the plan, it's actually saying this is what we do in the events of these disasters and how we recover this stuff. There should also be some specifics there prescribing how this plan gets reviewed. Once a year we do this kind of DR test. We do these backup tests. Our team reviews in management at the end of the year the plan. We reread it and we determine how well it applies. When we make major business decisions, such as a move, or we expand the company, or we cut staff, or we go through some change in direction, we're looking at our plan to see if it still makes sense. That should be within the plan itself, which gets to the next thing, which is adapting and reevaluating. So these are living plans. Nothing is sacred. When the business changes, we want to review how it impacts the plan. So if you decide one day, hey, we're finally getting rid of our email server, our document server, our ERP server, and we're moving it all offsite to Microsoft Azure or something like that. You should be changing your plan at that time. More modest changes, maybe you can let it sit for a little bit. But the idea is that when you're making these big infrastructure changes or changes to the way you work, you move, whatever, your plan is just not going to be relevant anymore. We have to update it. How well did the plan hold up after an incident or recovery? So what changes are needed? So I mentioned testing and evaluation. So if an incident occurred, how well did our plan work? Where did it fall short? What did we forget? I mean, there's a good chance that during either a drill or an actual incident, there's going to be something that we wish could have gone better. And that's not an indictment on the plan. It's not an indictment on the individuals designing the plan. It's just that a plan's going to get you 90% of the way, and there's always sort of that unexpected 10% that we have to use as an education opportunity. The plan champion should regularly assess if the plan still makes sense. So the champion's really going to be the one who's going to have to own this and care about it the most, and get the people within the plan to answer the questions about how regular it is. One thing I tell people regarding business continuity planning, disaster planning, et cetera, is that the champion can only lead. They can't make decisions for people within the plan. If you have a operations manager who runs your DR plan for you internally, that person may not be able to tell your deployment people or something like that how they should handle their stuff in the event of disaster. They can help guide those people, but it's going to be the people in their department who know how to do their jobs in the middle of a disaster. The champion is going to facilitate that. So just a quick tip, what are your peers doing? What's the standard? You don't have to reinvent stuff. You just want the best practices. When in doubt, steal it, and it's okay. I don't think DR plans are subject to copyright or something like that. I don't know what the legal standards are, but like if you know another business that maybe is a friendly competitor, or maybe they're in a different geographic region than you and you're not really competing with them, and they're along this DR planning stuff, feel free to, ask them. I know at DP Solutions, we're a Mid-Atlantic IT services company, but I have relationships with companies that aren't in the Mid-Atlantic area, and sometimes they give me ideas about how to operate our business that I would have never thought of. Seek that out, not just with your operation, but for DR planning, because chances are your peers are having some either successes where you're having failures or vice versa. So yeah, keep that in mind. So just wrapping up, and again, we couldn't get into everything, so make sure if you have questions, we get them in the Q&A. Disaster recovery planning should always be on the minds of management. A disaster could happen at any time. And so we should always be thinking about how we plan, what we want to change, et cetera. And we should be keeping on top of the news and such to figure out, are we really doing what we have to do? It can hit in a variety of forms. Traditional plans, we're really thinking about what happens to the site, what happens to the data center, right? And that's still relevant, of course. But now that people are decentralized, now that systems are decentralized, disasters can take on more forms. We have to be a little bit more broad in our planning, and we have to think more about incidents that could impact our operation in a significant way, as opposed to just the traditional, take all these incidents and figure out how we deal with them. The way we react and plan for incidents will have a major impact on really how they get resolved. So, organizations that don't plan for this stuff, that are maybe overconfident or don't look at these, will have worse outcomes, worse consequences when an incident occurs than those who plan. It's okay when our plans don't necessarily do everything we want perfectly if we get to the finish line, right? Think of it like dieting, right? Everybody has their cheat days when they diet. It's more like, how do we have a discipline to do this regularly and keep up so that the outcome is overall positive. Nothing is going to be perfect. By developing a plan that addresses your key risks, the consequences of a disaster can be minimized. And the only way this really works is by ensuring your plan suits you and gets the consistent attention it deserves. This is a living thing. It's active. It requires care. It's like going to the gym. You can't go to the gym today and say, you know what, I worked out for an hour and now I'm in shape. The way you get in shape is by going to the gym consistently, by eating healthy, by having a series of disciplines that make it so that you are fit. And so make your DR plan sort of like the way you make a fitness plan. Consistent small attention over a long period of time and adjustment throughout the process. So anyway, that's it. While we're getting questions, I will talk real quick about what we're going to go over in March, on March 30th. We're going to talk about IT policies every organization needs. I wrote a blog, I think, on this some time ago. We talked about DR planning today, but there are other policies that your organization needs to adopt, acceptable use, sensitive data, and other stuff that you may not come straight to mind. And so we're going to go over that. IT is not just about buying a bunch of technology and making sure it runs right and it's patched up. It's also about making sure people do the right things and operate in the right way and use their technology responsibly. And policy comes into that. Not just that, but with policy, you can't. Most organizations can't make the investments into some of the more sophisticated security and management technologies that could do some of this stuff for us. So if we have good discipline and good management, it can help maximize our investments in technology and minimize unnecessary expenses. Anyway, that's it. My contact information is right here. And in the meantime, Jill, do we have any questions from the group?
Yes, thanks, Ben. So yes, again, if you do have any questions, just write them out in the question box. And our first question is, do the people on my DR team need to be tech savvy?
No, not necessarily. I mean, you certainly the people who are doing like a system restore, or the people who are designing your network, or addressing a ransomware incident or something, these people obviously need to be technical. But the leaders and the people who make decisions really need to be focused on the business and the operation. They need to be focused on understanding the impact of an incident. They should understand maybe on a high level, these are the technologies we have and how everything relates to one another. But they don't need to be engineers even in the slightest. So I would say the answer is no.
Mm-hmm. Okay, makes sense. All right, let's see. Our next question is, how often should I run a DR test and how extensive should it be?
The answer is going to vary from group to group. I would think about things like, how many incidents have I had in the past? How much of a target am I? At minimum, I think an annual sort of review and test is appropriate, because you can sort of, most organizations have a few significant changes per year. And there's going to be a limit to how much bandwidth you can put behind this. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that the risks of an incident are so significant that you can't even imagine operating after it occurs. Well, maybe you need to do quarterly tests. Maybe you need to look at your plan even more often. Maybe you're a business that's going through a lot of change right now. You've just started, you have this startup, and you got 10 people now, but in a few months, we're gonna have 100 people, and then we're gonna go national or something like that. You probably owe it to yourself to continually adjust your plan. But a good rule of thumb, and really what most standards look for in terms of a stable business plan, would be like once a year.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, we did have one more question come in. I keep hearing about RTO and RPO. Can you explain that?
Okay. So these are technically backup terms. So RTO stands for Recovery Time Objective, and RPO stands for Recovery Point Objective. So recovery time objective is how much time will it take for us to recover. So if my system got locked up with ransomware right now and I decided to blow it away and restore it from a backup, what is the recovery time on that? It could be as fast as a few minutes. It could be a day. It could be several days. It depends on what you're restoring, how you're restoring it to, how sophisticated your technology is, so on and so forth. And just because an RTO isn't extremely low doesn't mean that the product is bad. It just may be that you don't need a high RTO. I imagine, like, for example, let's say that we had an incident and this PowerPoint presentation was encrypted by a bad guy, right? And I wanted to recover this PowerPoint presentation so I could do it. If the RTO wasn't 5 minutes to get this presentation back, my life would probably move on. It would probably be okay. I would be able to get the thing next day, or redo it. However, if for DP Solutions, all of our information that we use to access our client systems was lost, and we had no access to that, I mean, obviously the RTO would need to be very low. I mean, that's critical for our operation. So that's the RTO side. RPO is recovery point objective, so it's a different sort of thing. Imagine if we have that same incident, ransomware, we've lost our system, and now we need to recover. What is the point in time that we're going to recover? It's right now, it's 11:38 a.m. on February 23rd. Let's say by doing a recovery right now, the soonest recovery point I could get is midnight last night. That's when our recovery point was. That's the last time we backed up everything. That means that all of the work that I did from midnight to this point, it may not be captured in that recovery. So we're going to lose some data. Depending on your needs, you may need a sooner recovery point than others. You might be okay losing a morning's worth of data. You might be in a position where that's unacceptable. If you're in banking or finance and people are doing transactions, it's unacceptable to lose pretty much any amount of data, in which case there are replication solutions and other backup solutions that can address that. But the important point isn't so much what do these terms mean, it's more you as a decision maker needs to say, if we had an incident, how far back would be acceptable to go, and how quickly do we need to get that back up and running? And if you can answer those questions as a decision maker, technology people like system engineers, architects, etc., those people can figure out what kind of solution and investment that will require to achieve that business goal. So RTO and RPOs are super important to understand. Now, building that system, let the tech nerds do it, I guess. Any other questions?
Nope, that was our last question.
All right, terrific. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. I hope you had a good time and got some good information out of it. Make sure to check out our March webinar. You can see the information at the events page and register. Feel free to reach out to me. You've got my email address right there if you have any questions about stuff in this presentation or just in general. And of course, check out all of our information, stuff on the website. We provide lots of educational resources, information about governance, decision-making, etc. So thank you so much, and see you next time.
Thank you, everybody.